Good evening. The 2025 World Economic Forum takes place in Davos, Switzerland next week. AnewZ will be there at the event following 4 days of debate and discussions between 3,000 leaders from more than 130 countries. Well, the World Economic Forum's own survey, released just ahead of Monday's gathering, has identified extreme weather, armed conflict and disinformation as the top risks causing most concern to global leaders. Well, tonight we look ahead to the promise and the problems of Davos 2025. But first, Alisultan Sultanzade looks at the history of the world's most exclusive conference.
It is the end of January in the Swiss Alps. While ski enthusiasts might typically flock to these slopes, the town of Davos transforms into a global meeting ground each year, home to the World Economic Forum's annual meeting. It all started back in 1971 as the European Management Forum, founded by German economist Klaus Schwab.
Which show us to what extent we are in the midst of a revolution.
By 1987, it had expanded its focus beyond business management, rebranding as the World Economic Forum, a non-profit organization with a mission to improve the state of the world. Davos, typically a quiet alpine resort, takes on a new life during the forum. Security is tight, with Swiss police and military personnel ensuring the protection of visiting heads of state, CEOs and global influencers. At the heart of the action is the Congress Center, where around 2,000 to 3,000 participants debate world issues, from political tensions to technological breakthroughs. Meanwhile, the promenade at Davos Main Street becomes a bustling corridor. Though Davos takes center stage in January, the World Economic Forum's headquarters near Geneva is where most of the groundwork happens year-round. Home to over 600 of the forum's 800 employees, the Swiss base is a hub of policy research, event organization and global collaboration. The forum is also one of more than 600 international non-profit organizations based in that region. The annual meeting is known for drawing in eclectic crowds, from Bill Gates advocating for global health initiatives to Malala Yousafzai championing girls' education. Hollywood stars like Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt have highlighted a humanitarian crisis, while Matt Damon raises awareness for clean water. Leonardo DiCaprio has delivered impassioned speech on climate change. This star power underscores the forum's broad reach, shaping narratives that extend well beyond economics. Over the decades, the forum has played host to significant moments. In 1992, discussions here helped lay the groundwork for South Africa's peaceful transition from apartheid. In 1994, it contributed to shaping the Gaza-Jericho agreement between Israel and Palestine, demonstrating the forum's capacity to foster dialogue on pressing global issues. In recent years, global challenges have taken center stage. The Trillion Trees Initiative aims to combat climate change by reforesting the planet. In 2023, the Growth Summit placed a spotlight on AI, job creation and reskilling, securing an agreement with the UAE to train 600 million people by 2025. The following year, the Giving to Amplify Earth Action initiative was launched to mobilize $200 billion in climate and nature investments. Not everyone is enthusiastic about Davos, however. Critics argue it epitomizes elitism and question whether these high-level talks produce enough tangible outcomes. Each year, protesters and civil society groups stage demonstrations on site and in nearby cities, calling for greater transparency and accountability. Over the years, certain initiatives launched at Davos have translated into measurable impact. Ultimately, the World Economic Forum in Davos remains a place where power brokers, innovators, and advocates converge, striving, at least in principle, to shape a better future. Its influence is often debated, but for 1 week each year, this alpine town becomes the epicenter of global conversation, focusing the world's attention on both the challenges and possibilities that lie ahead.
Well, one of the many business leaders making his way to Davos is Kerry Adler, the president and CEO of the Skypower Group, one of the world's biggest clean energy companies. Mr. Adler joins us now from Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. Mr. Adler, we're having a few minor issues with sound where you are, but we're delighted to speak to you. Thank you very much for joining us. And Kerry, as the world turns from Abu Dhabi to Davos, what needs to happen next week for the sustainability sector, for industries like yours, to consider the meeting in Switzerland to be successful?
You know, this 2024 was an interesting year, and I think with all the changes in governments and in the direction that the world is going in, I think that this is probably the most critical Davos that I have ever, participated or plan to participate in. This is a time, not what's going to happen. Davos historically has been very good at setting a tone, setting a strategy for what potentially the world will look like in the future. I think what's critical is we acknowledge where we are today, going in together, find the best plan and the path to get there.
Kerry Adler, as always, great pleasure speaking with you. Wish you all the success as you complete your time there in Abu Dhabi, and look forward to potentially speaking to you again next week in Davos. Kerry Adler there for us.
Always a pleasure. Thank you so much, and everything you do.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, despite its prestigious reputation and continued popularity, Davos does also have its detractors. Not everyone agrees that global leaders making decisions together in an intimate, snowbound setting is something to be welcomed unequivocally. Well, earlier I spoke to Professor Jan Aart Scholte from Leiden University in the Netherlands to get the alternative perspective.
The World Economic Forum brings interesting contributions to the governance of the world economy, but also raises some concerns in the sense that it has been the source for many inspirations and rules for how we deal with the world economy, but is not a democratically elected organ. It's a self-selected gathering of mainly large global companies who then invite various other governments and civil society groups to join them in discussions and explorations about how we should govern the world economy. It's only welcome to have well-informed and committed inputs to governing the world economy, but in the end, it's a place for talking and shouldn't outdo its influence, certainly when it comes to questions of democratic accountability and fairness. The World Economic Forum is a welcome setting for creative thinking about how the world economy could be governed. My concern would be that there tend to be implicit limits to the amount of reimagination that one is invited to do. So the idea that one would, taking one of the themes of this year's World Economic Forum, reimagine growth. Reimagine growth is an invitation to rethink quite fundamentally what the world economy might be about. But when you look more closely, then reimagining growth is understood by the World Economic Forum as finding new sources of growth. So that's not an invitation to think about degrowth or to think about an economy that would be organized on principles other than growth. So in general, the World Economic Forum limits the degree to which one is invited really to rethink. We can talk about happy growth at the moment, but if it leads to climate catastrophe in a longer term, or if artificial intelligence is only seen as a source of growth and not thought through in terms of the wider implications it might be having for indeed what it means to be human in a longer term. It's some of those deeper, almost existential questions that the World Economic Forum keeps out of bounds, or at least may raise them in passing, but won't put them center stage on the table. And again, that's just the limits of this particular forum. But it's a very strong forum. It attracts several thousand of the main companies in the world. It attracts major governments, though in the current years it's a little bit less in terms of attracting the major governments. If one looks at the G20 governments, the group of 20 major economies in the world, it's only 3 of them or so that are attending. I think it's Argentina and Germany, and then Trump attends online, and South Africa. So the majority of the major world economies in terms of their heads of government and state are not attending at the moment, and that's also interesting to observe. What's interesting is that in the late 20th century, in the heyday of what one at that time called neoliberal globalization, opening up the world economy to reducing tariffs, reducing barriers to monetary, financial, and other flows, at that time, the World Economic Forum was really the place to be. It's the place where the World Trade Organization idea concept was launched. It's a major voice at the time for a humane globalization. A lot of major ideas about how we should govern and institutional initiatives about how we should govern the world economy came largely from World Economic Forum and Davos meetings at that time. It doesn't have that prominent a role at the moment. It's still very important, but it's not quite the place where everyone would flock to in the way that perhaps indeed before. 10 years ago, there was quite a major turn in the World Economic Forum in terms of attracting the leaders of China, of India, of Brazil. They gave keynote addresses at the World Economic Forum 10 years ago. Now they're not there. So one observes to some extent a little bit of stepping back, sending number 2 and number 3 rather than number 1. If you look at major discussions about climate and ecological degradation, if you look at major discussions about rebuilding trust in an era of rising populism and protectionism, if you look at questions about what technological transformations are going to mean for the future of the world economy, these are issues, big issues, and they're being discussed by important people and leading people in Davos. So it doesn't disappear overnight. The degree to which major governments might be saying, well, Davos is not the place where we have to show up because we're the ones who are really in control of the world economy, and we'll show that, we'll manifest that by not showing up at Davos. I don't know how much that's really going through their heads. But that can be a statement. Major states at the present time are making lots of noise about sovereignty, and the state is where it all happens. And maybe this is a subtle or not so subtle way that some major governments want to give that message. But to say that the World Economic Forum is irrelevant and that these governments are going to be the ones that make the rules for everything, that's far too much as well. Look at an area like artificial intelligence. The major governments are not leading the technological developments, they're not leading the rulemaking, and in many respects they aren't able to because that they don't have the capacity and the competence to do so. And so one will see that so-called multi-stakeholder arrangements where business and civil society and governments come together to look at these issues together, that will continue. That will continue. What I've observed over a number of decades is that major new developments in the economy, in the world economy, tend to run ahead of governments. So in the 1980s and 1990s, we had a globalization of financial markets, major innovations in financial markets and the like. Governments and regulators didn't understand what was going on, and the private sector, particularly the banks and the financial institutions, made many of the rules themselves because they needed rules in order to develop their markets. Later, it was the internet. The internet came up in the 1990s and early 2000s. Again, governments, states didn't really have enough clue what was going on. didn't have the competence to deal with the issues. And so the internet companies and the internet activists made their own forums for making rules and for developing the internet. Now we come to AI, and I see the same scenario playing out in general. Governments don't know what's going on. They haven't figured out what kind of rules they need. The industry says we need to have principles and standards and so on in order to develop our work. So we're just going to do it ourselves. And no doubt in the coming years, governments will start saying, yeah, but we should regulate this. And then they will come on the scene. But in each case, a little bit late. If we were to look ahead in a crystal ball to 2035 and what Davos meeting of the World Economic Forum might look like at that time, what I think will happen and what I would wish to happen would be rather different. What I think will happen is that the World Economic Forum will continue to be a significant place where people come together to discuss major issues of the evolving world economy and how it's governed. But I think that will still be a meeting where major corporate actors are the most strong, and major corporate actors from limited parts of the world are strong. The World Economic Forum that I would prefer to see would be one that was more representative of humanity as a whole, where participants from other countries across the world and other sectors of society would have more say and more participation. I have my doubts that such a development could come out of the DNA of the World Economic Forum.
Well, that's all we have time for on this edition of News Hour. Please do stay with us on AnewZ for plenty more news and analysis. And from all of us here, we wish you a very pleasant evening ahead.